Well, hello again, Internet. What is going on? I had an interesting week this week. And a thought that I had recently for this past week's research, it came across as a surprise. And the thought is basically, I'm constantly blown away with how blind we humans are within the world around us and our place within it. And not just we humans as like a singular human, but we as humanity in general. But there's hope, I think. And that's what this week's post is about. And if you're interested to dive into the details and see kind of how my thought process and my mental journey unfolded over this week, please go check it out. But in this video, I will give you kind of a quick summary and snapshot on some of the thoughts that I had and the gist of the post. This week started out with a friend of mine named Anthony who sent me a paper. And this paper is basically all about climate change and how machine learning can help fix some of the problems that we have with climate change. And I'll talk about the paper, but the more important piece about this whole entire process of me basically slamming my face against this paper consistently for many, many hours was that I realized the blind point that I made earlier around how blind we are. And in the post, I break it down into micro and macro. And micro, I mean, we as like a singular human, our brain is only capable of processing so much. So we think that we see the majority of the world, but we only see like 1% of it. And there's an interesting video I'll put somewhere around here that basically explains the premise around our perception, what we think we see, but what we actually are processing in our heads, because we're biologically wired to survive, us humans. And being biologically wired to survive, our brains basically do the bare minimum. Whatever needs to be done, that's what our brain does, and then it moves on to the next thing because it doesn't want to waste energy, time, or processing power for the brain. So that's the micro. But if you take that singular human and you amplify them to an entire society or humanity as a whole, you realize that bias of seeing what we see in the world and what we think is reality is amplified to an entire planet. And it's interesting to see how we humans have done so many stupid things in the past, and we continue to do so many stupid things today. Even though that stupidity spectrum, we're basically kind of getting closer and closer to less stupid because of all the amazing tools that we have around us and all the things that we've done to basically leverage these items around us and use tools to basically counteract our blindness and our biological kind of weakness of only focusing on survival. And an example of that historically, of us thinking that we see reality as it is if you go back to the ancient Greek times when Aristotle and Plato were hanging out and they're basically chit-chatting, talking about how the earth is at the center of the universe and everything revolves around us. We quickly found out that was wrong and that we aren't at the center of the universe, even though that is a nice thought to think. It's things like that small thing. And another thing I came across on the past things that we've done, which is quite crazy, is this concept called bloodletting. And back in, I don't know, it was like 2,000 years before the 19th century, we used to do this thing called bloodletting, where you just basically drain blood out of your body because we thought that was a way to cure a lot of diseases. And now we look back at that and we're like, why would you, that's crazy, why would you ever do that? Well, back then, that we thought that was the truth. We thought that was reality. And it's not just then that we did these crazy things. We do crazy things today that we don't necessarily realize are crazy. And that will continue to happen basically forever, probably. And one that I came across in this paper is two shrimp companies based in Scotland that basically catch hundreds of metric tons of shrimp, then they send them off to China and Thailand to get them peeled, and then they have those peeled shrimp come back to Scotland to sell them. And the amount of energy and carbon emissions and all the kind of the negative consequences of doing that just to have lower cost labor is just unreal. So it's like small examples like this that really kind of just make you step back and say, whoa, that's kind of crazy. And so the realization that I had when reading this paper, and like I said, slamming my face against it, is that we're blind, but there's hope, like I said. And the hope is the tools that we have around us, and not just the tools, meaning the tangible things that you can touch, but also the ways that we think and the behaviors that we have. And one interesting thought that I had, and the tool that came to kind of the top of the pile that I was thinking about, that I feel would be the most important for us to adopt as humanity, would be the tool of literacy. But not literacy in the sense of understanding what other humans are saying, writing, or depicting, but literacy in the sense of data literacy. And I know a lot of people are going to basically turn this video off as soon as they hear that, because as soon as you think that, you come up with, that's not for me, and that's fine. But the concept I'm trying to explain isn't necessarily, I don't expect you to be a statistician or a math magician or some sort of data scientist. That's not realistic. Most people won't do that. But I think there is a behavior and a mind shift that needs to happen within society. Similar to how we've had this quote-unquote information age, where we've had the internet, and everybody basically Googles or searches whatever problem they have to find a solution. The natural instinct for most people in the developed world is, if I have a problem, just look up on the internet, see if somebody else has solved it, find that solution, and solve it for myself. And the way I'm framing this in my head is that kind of exchange of getting information from other humans and solving your own problem, that's kind of the old information, which is still relevant and will continue to be. But this new type of information that I'm thinking about for data literacy would be information that's not coming from other humans, but it's coming from things. So it's coming from satellites, it's coming from sensors, it's coming from cameras, it's coming from all these different things that gather all this data and this information to give us a more objective view of the world. It's basically lifting the blinders off of our eyes and helping us see the world as it is instead of what we think it is. And by being able to have this ability to think in a data literate way is basically, hopefully, gonna give us the ability to see more opportunities, to be able to objectively look at problems differently. And I know this sounds like a big hurdle, and my goal is not to be like, everybody go out there and take a bunch of online courses for data science, because that's not realistic, like I said. But it's having that mindset of shifting towards something that's more second nature and more natural and more intuitive for people to think about problems and to ask questions in a different way. So 2 interesting examples in this paper around how we could use this mindset and this mind shift of thinking in a data literate way and approaching problems differently were 2 things. One was platooning, and the other one was seeing our carbon footprint for what it is. So the first one, platooning, is quite interesting. So imagine basically a whole bunch of autonomous vehicles, autonomous semi-trucks, driving in sync with each other, and they're all super duper close to each other. And when driving in sync, they're basically reducing the wind kind of resistance on the trucks, and they're saving tons and tons on the electricity spent and also the carbon emissions given. So they're basically kind of driving in sync. So that's platooning. And then the other one is the carbon footprint. So imagine a world where you have your phone, and basically with that phone there's an app or a collection of apps that basically pull your information from the flights that you've purchased, from the groceries you've purchased, from the Uber trips you've taken, from all these different areas, and it gives you kind of a holistic view of your carbon footprint. But to take it a step further, what if instead of just showing your carbon footprint, it actually told you what are some alternative behaviors, alternative things you can purchase, and alternative things you could do to reduce your carbon footprint? And not just to reduce your footprint, but maybe to have something that's more cost effective, so you don't have to spend so much money. So it's basically having this data given to you in a way that makes you make better decisions objectively instead of what you think are better decisions. So those are 2 interesting examples I gave in the paper, and they gave tons of examples. So before I explain the paper, I want to talk about the data literacy point and some baby steps that I thought of that might be useful for you, that you could kind of incorporate into your day, and hopefully we as a humanity start to incorporate it into our lives and our societies. Some of the ideas are basically to start asking different questions. So some of the more data literate questions that I put into this post, I won't list them all out, but one was basically, what information is being created now or exists around me that I could better use to solve this problem that I'm being faced with? Information in the sense of new information, not old information. The other thing was being more of a skeptic. So when someone throws a news headline at you or talks about some fascinating fact, ask yourself, or maybe even ask that person, where is this data or this information coming from? What's the source? Is this information, this data, by itself, or is it sitting within a broader context? And have you considered that? Another point that I thought about for baby steps that you could potentially use to kind of shift to this data literate mindset is to learn the lingo. So don't go out and basically feel like you have to learn everything. But if someone throws a word out at you, or you come across the word in an article or in a video, maybe just spend 2 minutes, no more, no less, researching, kind of Googling that word to figure out exactly what it means and intuitively understand it. You don't necessarily have to understand the formulas and the mathematics and all the complex stuff that comes with it, but just get a gist and an understanding of what it means, why it exists, and how it fits into the broader picture. And some words you could start with, if you want some words to start with, are some basic things in statistics like linear regression, mode, median, and mean, standard deviation, things like this. So when you see these, what does it mean? How is it interpreted? What's the broader context? Things like that. Now, I'm going to briefly explain the paper. So this paper that was sent to me is quite lengthy. It's a monster of a paper. I think it's over here, actually. Hold on. So here you go. Here's the paper. As you can see, there's lots of lines, lots of scratches, lots of me trying to figure out what in the hell these people are talking about. And I wouldn't recommend the paper for everyone, but it's definitely a paper useful for a lot of people. And the gist of the paper is basically they've pulled together not all of it, but most of the research, most of the ideas, and most of the problems and challenges that we're facing in climate change that machine learning could potentially help with. And luckily, the paper is written in a way that it's not necessarily too technical, so it's not too intimidating for most people. And the people that are behind this paper are actually quite, credible, because they've basically pulled a group of people together from some of the more kind of prestigious institutions within AI and some of the bigger companies in AI, such as Google AI, DeepMind, Stanford, MIT, Cornell, and then a long list of other companies and institutes that basically pulled this information together and worked on this project together. And the gist of it is basically they've taken two strategies that we can use to combat climate change. One is basically to slow the damage that we've already done or are doing, and then the other piece is basically to adapt to the damage that we've done. So slow down and try to reverse, and then the other piece is basically adapt to the damage and hopefully don't do any more in the future. And within those two subsections, there's more sections. So there's like 6 or 7 sections in here and 6 or 7 in this one, basically touching on all the different areas that we humans interact with the climate and make an impact, positive or negative. So that could be industry, transportation, energy, cities and buildings, policy, etc. But the important thing here is that this paper isn't necessarily strictly for machine learning nerds like me and the person that sent this to me. It's for a broader group, like I said. And if you're an entrepreneur, an investor, a policymaker, someone that works in a corporation that can potentially make a decision that would benefit the climate, all these people that need ideas, that need to understand what's happening in the space and how we can fix certain problems, this is relevant for all of them. So if you're any of those people, or if you're just generally interested in climate at all, I would recommend to at least skim this paper. Spend, 20, 25 minutes just looking through it and glancing at the titles and subtitles to get an idea for what kind of things are happening in the space and what kind of problems and solutions are we coming up with at the edge of AI. And if you're interested in the post, I've listed out a bunch of resources. Future Life Institute gave 2 different interview podcasts or informal interviews figuring out more about the paper. There's some good video summaries and blog summaries of the paper itself, so if you don't want to read the paper, then you can go to these. And then a couple other things that I came across in resources. There's a website for the paper, and then there's workshops that are recorded, all kinds of stuff. So go in the post and check that out. But the thing I want to leave you with here, is quite important, is the paper is good and the paper is interesting, but that's not the point, that's not the main point I want to get across in this video and in the post. It's that we as humanity and society are pretty blind, and we walk around blind, living blind a lot. This blindness is starting to get better. We're starting to see more because of the tools around us, but I think there's really got to be a mental shift and a mindset change and a behavior change in the way that we intuitively think about problems and opportunities, and to have a more data literate kind of way of looking at things. So, moral of the story, data literacy is quite important, and we humans should use the tools and change our mindset so we can see the world around us more objectively and hopefully create some really cool stuff and go do amazing shit like space colonization and solving climate change and, I don't know, editing our genetics so we can alter the way that we live and actually think. But anyways, that's all I had, my notes. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it's interesting. If you're interested in seeing more about my thoughts and what I thought about this entire process and this mental journey I went on this week, check out the post. It'll be linked below. If you're interested in my newsletter, I have a newsletter now, and it's basically 5 interesting things I've come across in the past week, related or unrelated to the post that I'm doing for that week. It could be movies, videos, podcasts, articles, books, I don't know, random images of stuff that I've come across if you're interested. And if you have any suggestions on what I could or could not research, let me know. I'd be interested to see what you have to say. Not to say that I'll research it, but sharing is caring. So, I hope this was interesting, and I will see you later, Internet.